Anselmus Cur Deus Homo. Book 2nd, Chapter 18a. How, with God, there is neither necessity nor impossibility, and what is a coercive necessity, and what one that is not so. Anselm. We have already said that it is improper to affirm of God that he does anything, or that he cannot do it, of necessity. For all necessity and impossibility is under his control, but his choice is subject to no necessity nor impossibility. For nothing is necessary or impossible save as he wishes it. Nay, the very choosing of refusing anything as a neither nor an impossibility is contrary to truth. Since then he does what he chooses and nothing else, as no necessity or impossibility exists before his choice or refusal, so neither do they interfere with his acting nor or not acting, though it be true that his choice and action are immutable. And as, when God does a thing, since it has been done it cannot be undone, but must remain an actual fact, still we are correct in saying that it is impossible for God to prevent a past action from being what it is. For there is no necessity or impossibility in the case whatever, but the simple will of God, which chooses the truth should be eternally the same, for he himself is truth. Also, if he has a fixed determination to do anything, though his design must be destined to an accomplishment before it comes to pass, yet there is nothing no coercion, as far as he is concerned, either to do it or not to do it, for his will is the sole agent in the case. For when we say that God cannot do a thing, we do not deny his power. On the contrary, we imply that he has invincible authority and strength. For we mean simply this, that nothing can compel God to do the thing which is said to be impossible for him. We often use an expression of this kind, that a thing can be can be when the power is not in itself, but is something else, and that it cannot be when the weakness does not pertain to the thing itself, but to something else. Thus we say, such a man be bound, instead of saying, somebody can bind him, and he cannot be bound, instead of nobody can bind him. For to be able to overcome is not power, but weakness, and to be able to overcome is not weakness, but power. Nor we say that God does exist by necessity, because there is any such thing pertaining to him, because it exists in something else, precisely as I said with regard to the affirmation that he cannot do anything. For necessity is always either compulsion or restraint, and these two kinds of necessity operate variously by turn, so that the same thing is both necessary and impossible. For whatever is obliged to exist is also prevented from non-existence, and that which is compelled not to exist is prevented from existence, so that whatever exists from necessity cannot avoid existence, and it is impossible to a thing to exist which is under a necessity of non-existence, and vice versa. But when we say it, but when we say with regard to God that anything is necessary or not necessary, we do not mean that, as far as he is concerned, that there is any necessary either coercive or prohibitory, but we mean that there is a necessity in everything else, restraining or driving them in particular way. Whereas we say the very opposite of God. For when we affirm that it is necessary for God to utter truth and never to lie, we only mean that such is his unwavering disposition to maintain the truth, that of necessity nothing can avail to make him deviate from the truth or utter a lie. When, then, we say that man who, by the union of persons, is also God, the Son of God, could not avoid death, or the choice of death after he was born of the Virgin, we do not imply that there was in him any weakness with regard to persevering or choosing to preserve his life, but we refer to the unchangeableness of his purpose by which he freely became man. For this design fixed that by persevering in his wish he should suffer death, and this desire nothing could shake, for it would be rather weakness than the power of he could wish to lie or deceive or change his disposition when before he had chosen that it should remain unchanged. And as I said before, when one has freely the mind to do some good action, and afterwards goes on to complete it, though if unwilling to pay his vow, he could be compelled to do so, yet we must not say that he does it of necessity, but with the same freedom with which he made the resolution. For we ought not to say that anything is done or not done by necessity or weakness, when free choice is the only agent in that case. And if this is so with regard to man, much less can we speak of necessity or weakness in reference to God, for he does nothing except according to his choice, and his will no force can drive or restrain. For this end was accomplished by the united natures of Christ, which that the divine nature should perform that part of the work needful for man's restoration which the human nature could not could not do, and that in the human should be manifested what was inappropriate to the divine. Finally, the Virgin herself, who were made pure by faith in him, so that he might be born of her, even she, I say, never believed that he was to die, save of save or she save of his own choice. For she knew the word of the prophet, who said of him, he was offered of his own will. Therefore, since her fight since her faith was well founded, it must necessarily turn out as she believed. And if it perplexes you to have me say that it is necessary, remember that the reality of the Virgin's faith was not the cause of his dying by his own free will, but because this was destined to take place. Therefore, her faith was real. If then it be said that it was necessary for him to die of his single choice, because the antecedent faith and prophecy were true, this is no more than saying that it must be because it was to be. But such a necessity as this does not compel a thing to be, but only implies a necessity of its existence. There is an antecedent necessity which is the cause of a thing, and there is also a subsequent necessity arising from the thing itself. Thus, when the heavens are said to revolve, it is an antecedent and efficient necessity, for they must revolve. But when I say that you speak of necessity because you are speaking, this is nothing but a subsequent and inoperative necessity. For I only mean that it is impossible for you to speak and not to speak at the same time, and not that someone compels you to speak. For the force of its own nature makes the heaven revolve, but no necessity obliges you to speak. But wherever there is an antecedent necessity, there is also a subsequent one, but not vice versa. For we can say that the heavens revolves of necessity because it revolves, but it is not likewise true that because you speak, you do it necessity. The subsequent necessity pertains to everything, so that we say, whatever has been, necessarily has been. Whatever is, must be. But whatever is, must be. Whatever is to be, of necessity will be. That is the necessity which Aristotle treats of de propositionibus singularibus et futuris, and which seems to destroy any alternative and to ascribe a necessity to all things. By the subsequent and imperative necessity was it necessary, since the belief and prophecy concerning Christ were true, that he would die of his own free will, that it should be so. For for this he became man. For this he did and suffered all things undertaken by him. For this he chose as he did. For therefore were they necessary, because they were to be, and they were to be, because they were, and they were because they were. And if you wish to know the reality necessity of all things which he did and suffered, know that they were of necessity because he wished them to be, but no necessity preceded his will. Wherefore, if they were not saved by his will, then had he not willed, they would not have existed. So then, no one took his life from him, but he laid it, that, but he laid it down of himself and took it again, for he had power to lay it down and to take again, as he himself said. Boso, you have satisfied me that it cannot be proved that he was subjected to death by any necessity, and I cannot regret my importunity in urging you to make this explanation. Anselm, I think we have shown with the sufficient clearness how it was that God took a man without sin from a sinful substance, but I would on no account deny that there is no other explanation than this which we have given. For God can certainly do what human reason cannot grasp. But since this appear adequate, and since in search of other arguments we should involve ourselves in such question as that of original sin, and how it was transmitted by our first parents to all mankind, except this man of whom we are speaking, and since also we should be drawn into various other questions, each demanding its own separate consideration, let us be satisfied with this account of the matter and go on to complete our intended work. Boso, as you choose, but with this in condition that, by the help of God, you will sometime give this other explanation which you owe me, as it were, but which now you avoid discussing. Anselm, inasmuch as I entertain this desire myself, I will not refuse you, but because of the uncertainty of future events, I dare not promise you, but commend it to be to the will of God. But say now, but remains to be unravelled with regard to the question which you propose in the first place, and which involves many others with it. Boso, the substance of the inquiry was this: why God became man, for the purpose of saving man by his death, when he could have done it in some other way. And you, by numerous and positive reasons, have shown that the restoring of mankind ought not to take place, and could not without man pay the debt which he outgot for his sin. And this debt was so great that, while none but men must solve the debt, none but God was able to do it, so that he who does it must be both God and man. And hence arises a necessity that God should take man into unity with his own person, so that he who in his own nature was bound to pay the debt but could not, might be able to do it in the person of God. In fine, you have shown that man, who was also God, must be formed from the Virgin, and from the person of the Son of God, and that he could be taken without sin, though from a sinful substance. Moreover, you have clearly shown the life of this man to have been so excellent and so glorious as to make ample satisfaction for the sin of the whole world, and even infinitely more. It now therefore remains to be shown how that the payment is made to God for the sins of men.